I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and with another Marvel Thor movie on the horizon, Thor: Love and Thunder, I've been thinking about whether or not I wanted to do another Thor-based video. Back when Avengers Endgame came out, I did a video that was an author's take on video, an unscripted one kind of like this one, where I went from the very first Thor movie all the way to Endgame, covering Thor's entire character arc, and basically picking it apart to demonstrate, at least as far as I was concerned, how it went in a certain direction and got to a really good place with Ragnarok until Infinity War and Endgame came along and decided to just undo all of it. I'd been thinking about whether or not I wanted to maybe remake that video, do it scripted with actual footage that I could show alongside the points I would make, but I didn't really want to repeat myself. Though, as I was brainstorming, something occurred to me. Something that is new, something I didn't mention in the previous video, and which, as far as I know, I haven't seen anyone else discuss. And you're gonna think it's a little weird, but all I ask is that you hear me out on this. Now, if you want to know what I said about Thor's arc in great detail, go and watch the original video. I'll provide the links so you can see and hear everything that I said. I don't intend to repeat myself too much here, though just for the sake of completion, I will summarize Thor's arc, because it's important to have that in mind. So, basically, Thor's arc in the MCU goes like this. When we first see him in that very first Kenneth Branagh-directed Thor movie, the character is not in a very heroic place. He's certainly hailed as a hero. He is the Prince of Asgard, son of the King of Asgard, Odin Allfather himself. He wields a unique weapon and has unique powers he can channel through it. He has fought in many battles. He has many friends that he has fought alongside with. Everybody loves him. Even his brother Loki, though that's only as far as the rest of the world is concerned. Loki clearly has his own intentions. But Thor basically has been built up to think he's the center of the universe, and he believes it. He is quite an egotist when we first see him, and his ambitions know no limits. He's set to ascend the throne of Asgard for the first time while Odin enters the Odin sleep, and Thor is really looking forward to it. He just can't wait to be king. He's gonna be the main event like no king was before. But right before it's about to happen, right before he is officially given that position, something happens that disrupts the ceremony, and with his pride wounded, Thor takes some really selfish actions that almost start a war between Asgard and Jotunheim, the realm of the Frost Giants, which, considering there had been peace between those realms for the longest time, that's not exactly the best way for a young king to start his rule, even if it's only a temporary one. So, Odin, deciding that Thor needs a swift kick in the pants and a lesson to be learned right darn now, strips him of his power and casts him down to Earth. And while he's on Earth, humiliated and powerless, he starts to realize that there is a world beyond him. The universe does not revolve around Thor Odinson. Thor is just one exceptional being in a world full of people with their own ambitions, people who can't necessarily fight for themselves the way Thor was able to, and it's his job as a person with power to use that power for the benefit of others, not to bolster his own ego, but to protect the people who count on him. And having learned that lesson, he regains his powers and saves the day because it's a superhero movie. And at the very end, Thor admits that he's not ready to be king. Not yet, anyway. But Odin assures him that one day he will be. And he has taken the first steps in his journey towards being ready. It is set up from the beginning that Thor will make a good king. Not that he might make a good king, perhaps, if he feels like it. No. Thor will be a good king. And we see that he takes the lessons to heart when we see him again in the Avengers, stating that if Loki thinks he has the right to rule others because he is superior to them, he misses the truth of ruling. During the events of Thor: The Dark World, Thor reaches a different conclusion. He decides that the throne maybe isn't for him. He feels that he's needed on Earth, fighting on the front lines with the Avengers, destroying evil, and of course continuing his relationship with Jane Foster. At first the movie is sort of painting it like this is the right conclusion, like Thor has had some sort of great personal realization that he's not cut out to be king after all. But we also learn right away that abdicating the throne is a huge mistake, because Loki, after faking his death a second time, has disguised himself as Odin and taken the throne for himself. And that, as you can imagine, is a bad thing. But we don't see the fruition of that immediately. During Avengers: Age of Ultron, not much is done to advance that particular arc, but Thor does get the impression that staying on Earth maybe wasn't a smart idea, so he has to leave as soon as Ultron is dealt with. And then we come to Ragnarok. Now, I've noticed a lot of people recently saying that Thor Ragnarok is the movie that ruined Thor, and shame on Taika Waititi for doing that. I have to ask, did we watch the same movie? I mean, yes, Thor Ragnarok increases the comedic moments. Yes, it's not afraid to have a laugh at Thor's expense multiple times. And yes, it's not your typical superhero movie, but at the same time, this is the movie that ended by allowing Thor to reach his full potential. First of all, it strips away everything from him. It takes away Mjolnir, his signature weapon that he felt a special connection with and through which he channeled his powers. It takes away Odin, who he always went to for wisdom, and who, if things ever got bad, he could always put back on the throne of Asgard, knowing that Odin is a good king and will take care of things. It took away his freedom by sending him to Sakaar and making him a prisoner to be paraded out for gladiator battles. But at the end, look at where Thor is. He didn't need his hammer. His powers were innate. It was always within him. He doesn't need to fall back on Odin, because Odin's wisdom has been instilled within him, and, more importantly, Thor has now reached a point where he is ready. He is ready to be king, and he takes the lessons he learned all the way back in the first movie and applies them here as well. He isn't concerned about saving Asgard the place, at least not by the end. At first, yes, he wants to prevent Ragnarok. That's why he went off and killed Surtur and did all that junk. But he realizes by the end that Asgard is a people, and at the end of the first movie, learning to protect the people was one of the things he had to learn about. So his priority becomes getting everyone away from Asgard and just allowing the things he cannot control to play out. Because that's a wise decision that a king can make, knowing when you're not supposed to fight. That's another lesson from back in the first movie. So by the end, Thor ascends the throne and it feels earned. It's all come to a head, basically. Thor has reached the conclusion of that first arc in his life, and now that he is king, the future is bright. There are all sorts of things set up at the end of Thor Ragnarok which make you feel like moving forward, everything is going to be different. So naturally, Avengers Infinity War makes it a priority to, from the very beginning, systematically undo everything that Thor Ragnarok set up, and essentially set the pieces for Thor to become the fat, pathetic slob that he is in Endgame. And look, I understand what the intention was with the fat Thor thing. I realized that the point was that he was supposed to become so broken that he just stopped caring, even for himself. and he had fallen hard from grace and needed to be restored. I understand that was the intention. That doesn't mean it actually played out very well, because, well, it was treated like a joke. Every time we see Thor shambling around, all hairy and chunky and everything, and acting and talking like he's not altogether there upstairs, it's always treated with just sort of a hint that you're supposed to laugh. Someone's always there to make a quips. There's the moment where Rocket slaps him, and it's clearly a slapstick moment, and the audience always laughs at it. So this thing that could have been really dramatic was instead treated like a joke because, well, God forbid we allow ourselves to actually feel anything other than happy when we're watching one of these movies. And word on the street is that the writers behind Infinity War and Endgame didn't really like the idea of Thor being king of Asgard for some reason, which is why they set about undoing it. I don't know if that's 100% true, but if it is, I think they're kind of missing the point. I mean, what exactly is their logic here? It's as if they think that once a character has realized the potential they were building towards during a certain part of their lives and then becomes king, there are no more interesting stories you can tell with that character, because who even is Black Panther? I've never heard of such a person in my entire life. And having undone all the progress Thor made and rendering every single one of his appearances prior to Endgame completely pointless, Thor is now left to tabula rasa. And if the trailers for Love and Thunder are any indication, it seems like not only do they not really have a plan for where to bring the character, but they're also gearing up to replace him with the one actor in this series who is probably less invested in returning than Anthony Hopkins. I, and many others I know, are not happy with the way Thor's story played out in the MCU. But while I was doing my recent brainstorming, I had an epiphany. I realized that I had actually seen a similar story running contemporary with the MCU, but even though it started off in the same way, it went in a very different direction, a direction which I feel could have greatly benefited the MCU, and Thor in particular, if they had gone in that direction instead. And like I said at the beginning, you're gonna think it's weird. Don't click away once you hear it. I ought just to ask you to hear me out, because I really do know what I'm talking about when I say that the place I've seen this same plot play out better is My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. Again, don't click away, don't scoff, don't jump down to the comments to tell me I'm crazy or weird I am. Trust me on this. I have a solid thesis. Now, I realize that some of you might think comparing the Marvel Cinematic Universe to the fourth generation of My Little Pony is weird and may not even be proper. After all, one of these is based on material that was originally aimed at children, yet somehow found an audience well outside its initial target demographic, and the other is a cartoon about ponies. But if you hear me out, like I keep asking you to, you might be surprised at how similar they are, particularly when we bring the Thor movies in. So since I devoted a lot of time to summarizing the first Thor movie, I think it's only prudent that I summarize the first episode of My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. To similar effect. Again, I'm not going to bore you with too much detail, but I think it's important that you at least have a proper summary. The main character of MLP is Twilight Sparkle, a unicorn living in the royal city of Canterlot. She is incredibly smart, she is very gifted when it comes to wielding magic, and she is the protege of no less than Princess Celestia, ruler of the magical kingdom of Equestria. However, Twilight also has a pretty severe character flaw. She is antisocial. And by that I don't mean she's introverted and just likes to have her alone time. No, I mean antisocial. She does not think there's any point in having other people in her life. Other ponies, you know what I mean. She openly rejects the idea of thinking that friends are at all necessary. The only people she has in her life are her family, which we don't see at first, the princess, whom she has a very professional teacher-student relationship with, And Spike, a baby dragon who is kind of like a little brother and also kind of like a personal assistant. And she's not very nice to him either. Basically, Twilight figures that she just needs herself and no one else. When we first see her, she's convinced that there's an impending disaster threatening the land of Equestria, specifically the return of an ancient evil being named Nightmare Moon. When she tries to warn the princess about this, the princess responds by saying, "You read too many books, I have a better way for you to spend your time." And so she sends Twilight to the rural town of Ponyville with the task of making sure a particular annual celebration for the kingdom is in order, but also with the task of making some friends, which she desperately needs to do. Twilight hates the idea. One gets the impression that she would rather chew glass. And although she does wind up meeting 5 other ponies who live in the town, she doesn't really hit it off with them right away and does everything she can to avoid interacting with them for too long. However, Twilight's prediction winds up coming true. Nightmare Moon does return, she casts eternal night over the kingdom, and so Twilight must go with the other 5 ponies that she met on a journey to gather the MacGuffin that will defeat Nightmare Moon, the Elements of Harmony. And on that journey, she does wind up forming more of a connection with these 5. And by the end, they have indeed become friends, and it is through their friendship that they're actually able to use the Elements of Harmony to save the day. And it turns out this was all a bid by Celestia to basically allow Twilight to be the hero, but not just for her own glory, but also to save Nightmare Moon, because Nightmare Moon was actually Princess Celestia's sister Luna, who was corrupted. Now, at the end, Twilight has realized that there is actually a practical reason why you need more people in your life, but she also realizes there's something more to it. Maybe she really has been missing out on having friends, not just because of the things you can do with them and the things they can do for you, but just because there's something about having them in your life that makes you feel better. So she stays in Ponyville to explore this idea a bit more, and the series progresses from there. Now, like I said, even though it at first seems like these are very different things, I think that if you line up the summary of Thor's first movie with a summary for the pilot of Friendship is Magic, you can see the similarities. Each one features a character who is incredibly powerful, but also has a crippling character flaw, and so the leader of the kingdom in which that character occupies and which they have a personal connection to sends them to a comparatively rustic location where they will learn lessons that help them overcome that flaw and become the hero that they are supposed to be. It's not an exact one-to-one comparison, I realize, but it is there. There is a similarity. And from there, the 2 stories diverge because, you know, the MCU is a live-action, action-packed, high-fantasy science fiction setting that's driven by epic fights and CGI. MLP became more of a slice-of-life series that only occasionally went into fantasy adventures. But there did come a point where the 2 became similar again. And interestingly enough, MLP reached that point first. It was at the end of Season 3. The Season 3 finale was the moment that broke the Brony fandom. That was the first major split that happened. I know, I was there. It basically goes like this. After all the events that play out throughout the season and that particular episode, it is revealed that Twilight has reached such a point in her development that she's now ready to take the next big step. She is ready to, as the show puts it, fulfill her destiny, and she becomes an alicorn, basically a unicorn with wings. That is like the highest form of equine you can get in the series. And she becomes the princess of friendship. This was a big deal. She essentially ascends to royalty, much like Thor does at the end of Ragnarok. She has now realized her full potential, and let me tell you, the response from the fandom was not a good one. I mean, there were people who liked it. There were people who thought, cool, I can't wait to see where they go from here. But there were other people who thought, this is horrible. They forever changed the character. This is too great of a change. The show has jumped the shark. The show is over. The fandom is dead. I am leaving. Now, the staff at DHX Studios that produced the show had a more close relationship with the fandom than other cartoon staff does, and heck, most movie staff and what have you. They actually listened to the fandom, they knew the fandom existed, and they would, once they became aware of this whole phenomenon of just how big the show had become, they started sprinkling in little things to let the fans know that yes, they were indeed listening. If there was a one-off villain who became really popular, that villain would be brought back and maybe even reformed into one of the good guys. If there was a certain background character with an interesting design that the fandom had written like epic tomes worth of fan fiction about, those characters would start being deliberately placed in the background in ways that sort of referenced those fan theories. Things like that. They had a good relationship with the fandom. Even when it came to this, even when it came to people demanding that the change be reversed or else just end the show because there's no possible way it can survive something this horrible, they didn't lash out like so many other content creators have taken to doing these days. Instead, they said, just trust us, we know what we're doing. This is going to work, just bear with us for a moment. Now yes, realistically they probably couldn't have reversed it even if they did want to, because the show was ultimately controlled by Hasbro. Hasbro's main interest in the show was how it would be able to sell toys. Toys of an Alicorn Twilight are presumably going to sell, so keep the change no matter what. But you could also look to the original show Bible and see that having Twilight become an Alicorn was always part of the plan anyway. And even though it was a controversial decision, they stuck to it. They didn't do anything to reverse it. They didn't devote the opening of season 4 to stripping away Twilight's powers and returning her back to being a normal unicorn, or even making her somewhat less than a unicorn. They stuck to it. They kept her with wings and everything. She's still a princess. And as it turned out, the show wound up running for 6 more seasons, plus a theatrically released film, plus several direct-to-video spin-off films, plus an ongoing comic book series that I'm pretty sure is still running today, even after the show has officially ended. Yeah, it didn't end the show, and a lot of fans will tell you, those who didn't storm off in a huff, of course, they'll tell you that some of the best episodes of the entire series came after Twilight became an Alicorn. It turns out that Twilight becoming a princess didn't limit the amount of stories you could tell with her. If anything, it opened up opportunities for new kinds of stories you might not have been able to tell if they just kept her a regular unicorn. So it worked out in the end. It's really kind of stunning that I didn't realize this sooner. Here we have 2 different stories that, probably by coincidence, wound up following very similar paths up until a certain point, and when those points were reached, one of them chose to commit to it and explore the possibilities of what that would bring them, while the other decided that it had to do away with what had been done and strip back everything until it had nothing left. And strangely enough, the series that committed to the major change was the one designed to sell toys to little girls, whereas the highly respected big-budget live-action blockbuster chickened out. Twilight Sparkle started off in a very bad place, was allowed to grow, grew to the point where she actually gained status for it, and it was earned, and then once she had that status, it turned out there was more to do, more growing, more learning, until finally she reached a point where she was ready to actually replace her mentor, Princess Celestia, on the throne, and truly become the living embodiment of friendship. Whereas with Thor, he started off in a place of selfishness, grew to learn selflessness, earned the place where his selflessness would finally inform his ability to be king, and then all of that was taken away, and when we last saw him at the end of Endgame, he was back to a place of selfishness. In that first movie, Thor is only concerned with himself, his own well-being, what is good for number 1. At the end of Endgame, he says that ridiculous line, "It's time for me to find out who I am, not who I'm meant to be." Which is just another way of saying that he is once again only concerned about himself and his own well-being and what's good for number 1. he literally was reset right back to square one. That is not Taika Waititi's fault, people. I don't know where people are getting that idea, but that was not him. That was not what Thor Ragnarok set up at the end. That was the result of Infinity War and Endgame tearing everything down. And now that Love and Thunder is coming out, it really does seem like they don't know what to do with the character anymore. Then again, he's going to be replaced by Jane Foster Thor anyway, because that went over so well when it was done in the comics. Wait, no it wasn't. And that's another part of why I feel like Thor's story shouldn't have gone that way. Because I had seen it done before. And I saw that just because you reach the end of one particular era of a character's journey doesn't mean there's not more you can do once a drastic change has been made. But Marvel has made its bed and now it must lie in it. I don't know what's going to happen with Thor Love and Thunder, but given everything we've seen so far, I have a feeling it's not going to be up to the standards set by a cartoon featuring candy-colored magical ponies. Really let that sink in for a moment. So yeah, that's the new addition I had for this particular topic, and it looks like it was enough to fill a lengthy video of its own. So no need to remake what was already done. I will just leave this as it is, and boy am I curious to see how people respond to this one. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books, Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.